good evening, good morning, wherever you are. I'm Donald Cook with the Richmond Police Department, and I bring you greetings on behalf of our Chief Gerald Smith, and the over 800 employees of the world-class Richmond Police Department. We are here with our prevention and awareness series. For the last 2 weeks, we've hosted sessions to try to educate, as we always do, our citizens about how they can stay safe and to hear some great information. And hopefully you will hear some great information on tonight that you can share with others. I would like for my coworkers to introduce themselves, and then we're going to go right into our guest speaker. So we'll start with Officer Elamine.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Officer Elamine. I've been with the police department for 12 years and with community care for almost 7 now.
Okay.
All right. And Officer Elamine, would you tell them the type of groups that you work with?
My specialty is working with the youth. I'm small like a little person. I'm 5'2", so the kids are usually bigger than me. So I'm unintimidating, if you will. And I like to have a good time. Kids, I love hanging around kids. I have kids of my own, and they are a joy, as you know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Officer Elamine. Officer Kim Cheatham.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Officer Cheatham. I've been with the police department for about 27 years. I am the coordinator for the Homicide Support Group and the Faith Leaders Partnership.
All right. And just to remind everybody, we are a part of our Community Youth and Intervention Services Division. I liken our division or our department to the outreach or marketing hand of the department. So if it has to do with education, if it has to do with interaction with youth and teaching the various segments of the population on how to stay safe, then it will primarily come out of our office here. So we're so glad that you've taken out your time to join us on tonight. I want to remind everybody that you can reach us at RPD Cares, that's RPDCARES at richmondgov.com if you have any questions about tonight's presentation, or if you would like to learn more about what we do. Of course, you can reach us all over social media at Richmond Police Community Care Unit. You can also reach us also at our website at richmondgov.com. That's richmondgov, gov.com/police. So we're excited again that you all have decided to join us on tonight for our prevention and awareness series. And I have the pleasure to introduce our special guest on tonight. She is Shirley W. Ramsey, and she conducted a very meaningful training for us, I believe just last month. She is an advocate, an educator, a counselor, a mother, friend, and trainer. And thank you so much, Shirley, for joining us on tonight, and take it from here.
All right. Well, thank you. And it's really exciting to see all of you on here and have an interest in such a much needed topic to be discussed. Just to share a little bit about me, he pretty much told you some of my titles. I was an elementary teacher and then became an elementary school counselor. And I retired from Henrico Schools about 11 years ago after 33 years. But I didn't really retire. I still substitute both as a school counselor and as a teacher. I was a coach. I taught springboard diving for 35 plus years and Sunday school teacher. And so kind of like Mr. Elmine, my life has been around young people. They fuel my energy. I love working with them. And but what brought me to this topic? I am a lead volunteer with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I am a survivor of suicide loss. I've lost several family members to suicide. And through my grief journey, I have learned that the importance of awareness. And what I have learned that through education and awareness, we can prevent tragedy. And, you know, that's why I'm here. So tonight's program is a PowerPoint. It's about 30 minutes long, and it has a really good overview and brings you lots of information for prevention and also to encourage people to ask for help, because that is one of the barriers with mental health issues, is getting folks to realize that they do have some type of mental illness condition going on, and really to be able to recognize that, and also to get the courage, which is very hard for people to ask for help. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, but I will tell you this topic is a difficult one, and it can bring about strong emotions for people. If it has to do with depression, anxiety, tragedy, loss, and that sort of thing. And one of the things we always say at the beginning is, you know, if this topic gets difficult for you, and if you have trouble with it, and you know, feel like you need to not watch it or something, we certainly understand that. But we have these leaders that we have on here today are here to help follow up. Mr. Cook said that I know we can put the chat on. So if someone has a question, we like to leave most of the questions for the end, but maybe if you want to put your question in and he can write it down so that we can cover it at the end, so that we can get through the PowerPoint first. So sometimes though, when a question comes to your mind, if you don't get it in then, so what you can do is put the question in the chat to everyone, or individually to a particular person. Also, those of you that do work for the police department and do know of any resources that may become of topic in our discussion or at the end, you know, you can put some your resources in the chat as well. Put the links for people, just like the link you were given a minute ago. That would be a good one to put in the chat. And I'll put some in about my organization as well. Okay, with all that, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, and bring my so I would go ahead and yeah, you could Mr. Cook, just might be good for you to have the chat open. I will not be able to see the chat because I'm going to be busy presenting, but it's just kind of good to have that in case anyone has any issues or anything.
Yes, ma'am. I'll monitor the chat for us.
Okay, great. Okay. All right. Well, this suicide, you know, can be a sensitive topic, as I said, and this is pretty much an introduction to a difficult topic, and we're just glad that you're here. So let me move forward. Suicide is a very complex health issue, and one that it's good to have awareness about. Despite its complexity, it can be prevented. And that's something that we need to remember. Just like there are warning signs and risk factors for other health crises like cardiac arrest, we can learn the warning signs and risk factors that can help us to prevent people from dying by suicide. As with other health issues, prevention can start early, far in advance of the problem, and prevention can occur closer to the time of the crisis. Time, remember that, time can be critical and life-saving measure. Typically, a life can be saved if you allow time for the person's suicide risk to subside or to get through that period of distress and to get mental health help. So to prevent suicide, we need to identify a person who may be suicidal, as well as taking an active role in connecting them to help before they take action to end their lives. These are the areas that the PowerPoint pretty much goes over. Pretty much the purpose of Talk Saves Lives is to provide community members with a general overview about suicide, who it affects, and what can be done to prevent it. It can be shown, I would say, to older teenagers on up in all different kinds of communities. We offer also a Spanish version. I don't know if we have any other versions, but it's good to know that that is available. It will cover some statistics to give you an idea of the scope of the problem. We'll review some of the key research findings, including the risk and protective factors that relate to suicide. And then we'll talk about what works and what we can do to prevent this leading cause of death. One of the things that we always address at the beginning is how we talk about suicide. It is important to model appropriate language so that we don't perpetuate the stigma of suicide and mental health conditions. And also, we don't want to provide triggers for people. So language is very important when you talk about mental health and suicide. These are the ways that we'd like to encourage people to talk about suicide. We avoid using the phrase committed suicide, as it can have a negative connotation. Instead, we encourage the phrases died by suicide over here, okay, ended their life, or killed themselves. We try to stay away from saying that they failed in an attempt, because we certainly don't want them to be successful. And we certainly don't want to say that they are successful at an act such as a suicide. Educating the public about suicide is critical, encouraging help seeking, raising awareness of risk in vulnerable populations, and advocating for new interventions and prevention strategies for those at risk. When suicide is talked about safely and accurately, we can reduce the likelihood of its occurrence. We want to change how society understands mental health and suicide, because when we open up and connect, talk really does save lives. One thing that I have experienced since I've been working with the American Foundation for Suicide was I used to notice in reporting, if I saw a reporting of a suicide on the news, they would use the term commit. But the Associated Press in reporting has established not to use that term. So notice if you see it reported on television or in media services now, it really is encouraged that they do not use the word commit. Okay, the scope of the problem. It's a significant issue that affects individuals, it affects families, and communities. So the large scope of the problem is that World Health Organization says that globally we lose over 800,000 people die by suicide each year. And while this is the most accurate data that we have, we kind of figure that the numbers could be higher. This is a moderate number because many suicides go unreported in other countries. So with that said, someone dies by suicide every 40 seconds. That's on a global, looking at it globally. In the United States, it's the 10th leading cause of death. And we use CDC reporting. And usually when we post these on slides and that sort of thing, it's a couple years behind because it takes, a year or two to gather all these statistics for a particular year. And I will say that when I started this, getting involved with this in 2010, it was 37,000 people died by suicide. And since then, it's up to over 48,000 had died by suicide. So there has been increase. However, good news is the first time in 20 years, in 2019, the numbers stats actually went down for the first time in 20 years. So we can see that educating and awareness and talking more about mental health issues is really helping us to encourage people to get help. Now, unfortunately, with the pandemic, we don't have the reporting. I don't know what's going to happen with the numbers then, but with all that we're doing and so much outreach has gone on, it's been very encouraging. For every suicide, 25 others attempt. That's about 1 million Americans each year who survive a suicide attempt. Suicide impacts individuals and communities. So when you think about any loss, it impacts many people in a community. Suicide, of course, is no different. In fact, I've experienced oftentimes where someone may hear of a suicide, and even though they may not know the person, it still has a strong impact on them. I've seen teenagers who were very impacted by another teenager's suicide, even though they may not have even known that person that attended their school. I've experienced that talking to teens. It has an economic impact, 69 billion per year in the United States. Not only is it a devastating toll it has on families and communities, but it also has a fiscal impact. Now, we don't put a dollar on life, but what it is the cost of the United States is about 69 billion, and mainly due to loss of wages and productivity, and for funeral costs and such. The next category we look at is research. Only in the past several decades have we really begun to study suicide. I had lost my mother to suicide when I was a child. And when I was in graduate school, I actually wanted to find out research. And this was back in the 80s. It was very hard for me to find research. But now today, there is so much more research. And that's one of the things that our foundation raises money for, is to provide funding for research to learn more about the brain, learn more about treatment, learn more about accessibility to healthcare, all of them, all the above. Why do people take their own lives? One of the main questions research explores is why. It was one of the questions that I asked being a survivor. Through research, we have learned that there is no single cause of suicide. Suicide most often occurs when a lot of stressors and a lot of risk factors converge together and create that storm of hopelessness and despair. So you really can't put just one single cause on death by suicide. It usually takes many, many converging factors, which is what I'm going to go over with in a few minutes. Large majority of people who die by suicide do have a mental condition contributing to their death. And quite often, it may be a mental condition that has not been diagnosed or has not been adequately treated. And one of the reasons we do this is many people who die by suicide may not even realize that they're depressed. 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health condition. And the good news is most people do not go on to die by suicide. It is not that abnormal for people at some time in their life to may have had suicidal ideation or had thoughts of suicide. But most do usually go on to live, good, fulfilling lives as long as they continue with self-care, taking care of their health issues and their diet and such. One thing that research has showed us is that the brains of people who die by suicide do differ from those who die from other causes, both in structure and in function. Now they are able to do MRIs of the brain. They can actually see the activity in the brain. And if anyone has seen some of those or have looked them up, they show the brain of a depressed person and they show the brain of a more normal acting person or one who is not suffering from depression. And there's much more activity in that brain versus the brain of someone whose neurotransmitters may not be connecting efficiently. So it is a different physical condition than from a brain that's not depressed. Most people who are suicidal are ambivalent about taking their life. We've learned that that a part of them still always wants to live, even though there is a part of them that wants to die. And what we try to do is focus on that part of a person that still wants to live. We try to bring that out versus bringing out the part of them that feels like they need to die. Research has informed key strategies in suicide prevention that involve engaging the part of the person that wants to stay alive and help to create a distance from the part that wants to die, just as I said. And one way we do that is to help the person connect with reasons for living while at the same time decreasing the visibility and presence of things around them that may facilitate their desire to die. And one of the reasons why it's important to not have the means available to die by suicide. The perspective of a suicidal person, okay. One of the many important things we have learned from research is about perspective of a suicidal person. That there is a crisis point that has been reached in that person. So for a suicidal person, the pain seems unbearable. Whether it can be emotional pain, it can be physical pain, or sometimes both of those. For a moment, I'd like you to think back about a physical pain experience you may have had in your life. And at that moment, would you have been able to give someone clear and accurate directions to your house when you're in pain? It's pretty much the same. You think about when someone is in a suicidal ideation moment and is thinking about suicide, it's very difficult for them to think rational. And that's the part of them that we want to help them with and try to get them back to thinking in a more clear way of wanting to live. Thinking becomes constricted, and a state of intense tunnel vision is all they think about is that motive to want to die, to end their pain, because their pain seems to be very unbearable emotionally. So what we want to do is look at who is at risk. We look at 3 areas of risk factors. We look at their health history. We look at their historical history of what they've been through in their lifetime. And we look at the environment, okay? So let me give you some examples of that. Risk factors, they're important. They know that it says important to know to understand the big picture of someone who is considering suicide. Just like someone who is at risk for heart disease because of high blood pressure, or a person could be at risk with diabetes and having to depend on insulin. So those are risk factors. And as you know, they may have certain things they can and cannot do, and they have to take care of themselves. It's the same thing with mental illness. You have risk factors, and if you take care of them, you can prevent someone from getting very, very ill. The main risk factors shown are these 3, okay? So let's look at the first circle. What are the health factors that someone may be experiencing? And that would be any mental health conditions. These are just some that they list. Depression. And depression is the most common mental health condition and the one that is the most associated with suicide. Bipolar also is shown to be at high risk, although the disorder is less common than depression. And then because of these conditions do put a person at greater risk, detecting presence of these conditions is very critical and is part of their prevention. So the best way to be sure when you feel concerned or detect a possible change in you or your loved one with mental health, it is for the person to seek help. So they can have eating disorders, personality disorders. They may go in and out of a psychotic or psychosis, a psychotic break, they call it. PTSD, if someone has experienced trauma and suffers from PTSD, that certainly can put them at risk. And then, of course, substance abuse use can put a person at risk. Other health risk factors that can add to that would be Often if someone has a chronic health condition, perhaps if they have cancer that can't be cured, someone who may have chronic pain certainly can enhance depression. And as we know, serious head injuries. I heard something, as you know, they're saying that if someone has some pretty serious concussions, that can cause brain damage. One of the things I think about was there was a movie called Concussion. And on that movie, they made a statement which kind of stuck with me. It says, you know, our head and our skull, we are not woodpeckers and we are not rams. And we cannot bang our heads very hard a lot without it causing damage to the function of the brain. Not always, but can. All right, the next circle that we look at are your historical factors. You look at the family history of suicide. You know, my family is at risk because we've had multiple suicide losses in our family. If there's a family history of mental health conditions, behavior history, oftentimes you may see someone suffer from anxiety, and then maybe some of the offspring suffer from anxiety. So lots of times they can be connected and run in families, just like heart disease can run in families, diabetes can run in families, mental health can run in families. Certainly child abuse can cause someone to trigger depression and anxiety and other mental health conditions. Certainly if someone has had the ideation and has actually attempted and survived, they could be at risk for another attempt. Not always, of course, but for some people, yes. And then, of course, another thing that can really trigger mental health issues is loss. A loss of a loved one, loss of a pet, things like divorce or loss of finances. Any kinds of losses certainly can cause one to struggle. Then, okay, so you have looked at your historical. You've looked at the, what was the other one? Historical and biological, I think. And then the last one, yeah, health issues, right. And then the last one we look at is the environmental factors. What is in their environment that can also encourage them to not think clearly or get down or obsess on certain things. If someone is at risk, if they have access to lethal means, have access to guns or medications that they should not take or anything like that, that certainly can encourage them to have suicidal behavior. Exposure and contagion. You know, we get concerned sometimes when, for instance, when Robin Williams died by suicide, the famous comedian, actor, the statistics went up for suicide often after someone well-known dies. It seems to trigger for other people. Sometimes for teenagers, the contagion can have an impact, thinking that is an option to use to cope with hopelessness and despair, which we know is not, but it can be a contagion. And that's why the language is very important, how we talk about it. Prolonged stress, if someone is under a lot of stress, or someone has certainly had a stressful life event happen in their life. You know, we often think, what did we see in that person that could have caused them to die by suicide? Well, it's not always what we see. There's a lot that we don't see in a person. We often talk about the mask that people put on. What don't we know about a person that could cause them to struggle? Again, we talked about running in family. Is there a genetic risk? Is the person suffering from a mental health condition that we may not know about, or they may not realize themselves? Are they under stress that we may not know, or maybe they drink more than usual, or are hiding substance abuse practices. So there's a lot of things that we see on the outside, but there are also going to be a lot of things that we don't see. So, why do we raise money for research? Because that is how we're going to do some problem solving. That's how we're going to find out biomarkers. Research is looking at biomarkers. Well, what do I mean by that? Something that's testable in a blood sample that would actually help us identify those at risk. We're working on research on that. We're also looking at a number of treatments, like particular types of therapy, which are more effective, which are not. Which interventions are available in communities? How effective are those interventions in communities? Where do we need to put intervention? What types of interventions do we need to have for our youth, for our adults, and for our senior citizens? Okay. And also we have to do research on medication to find out which ones work. Often I've seen people maybe that were on the wrong medication. They had not been diagnosed and were taking maybe something for depression when actually they were bipolar or vice versa. So we really like to study and get diagnosed on people so that we know what medications to use with them. So that's a little bit about the research. So what do we do? How do we prevent? As I said, just like there's risk factors that increase a person's risk for suicide, there are also protective factors that lower a person's suicide risk. So if you are proactive and aware, that certainly is going to help create a healthier environment or protect yourself if you are aware and know what to look for, and also in our loved ones as well. So we really want to make sure that if mental health care is needed, seek it out. We don't hesitate to go to the doctor if we have a stomach virus. We don't hesitate to go to the doctor for a sinus infection, but sometimes we do hesitate to go to the doctor because we're feeling depressed. So we want to look at mental health care as a health condition that is treatable. Certainly another protective factor is having the family support the one that struggles. If the family is not intact and is not there, what community interventions can we put in place to help a person? One of the things that I really stress is problem-solving skills. Being a school counselor, one of the things I kind of had an aha moment about was I learned that self-esteem and resiliency didn't always come from being successful or receiving a lot of praise or being responsible or having a lot of accomplishments. What I learned was resiliency and self-esteem came from being able to solve our own problems and learning that we are capable of doing that. As a school counselor, when I would talk to parents, I would say, I think we need to remember to not really solve our children's problems for them, but we need to facilitate and show them how to problem solve. Ask them what they need to do, not tell them what they need to do. That's a whole completely different approach. And if we can get people to realize that they do have it within themselves to solve the problems, and if they don't, it is a skill that they need to learn and can be taught. So I'm a big advocate for problem-solving skills. I've seen what an impact it can have to build a person's resiliency. And then I've also, of course, culture and religious beliefs that encourage connecting and help seeking discourage, and we know how culture and religious beliefs discourage suicidal behavior, and it really can create a strong sense of purpose in a person if we are able to show them that our culture just does not say that's an option. It's not a choice. It's not the way out of a bad situation. Mental health care is an important ingredient for preventing suicide. Getting effective treatment for mental health condition like depression or anxiety certainly can cause it to be prevented. You know, when I first started doing this presentation quite a few years back, we used to say that suicide is preventable. We changed the terminology to say suicide can be preventable, okay? Because like all diseases and illnesses, we haven't been able to prevent every person from dying from cancer or every person from dying from heart disease, but we certainly have gotten better and we save more lives every day, what we've learned through our medical research. Well, it's pretty much the same for suicide. The more and more we learn, the more we do, the more we talk about it, the more we reduce the stigma, we found that we can prevent it. And this is one of my favorite statements. I really like this statement. We need a culture where everyone knows to be smart about mental health. You know, I have found over the years talking about it, I find a lot of people are not aware of a lot of things that can help with prevention. We need to get people connected to their mental health treatment. We need to let them know that it's okay not to be okay. One way to encourage individuals to seek help for their mental health conditions is to treat mental health like any other aspect of their health. There are certain times when a person becomes ill and has a chronic health condition to manage, and it's critical to seek trained professionals. So we get trained professionals for heart disease, we get trained professionals for autism, we get all of those kinds of things. It's good to go to trained professionals for mental health as well. Often I've heard people say they won't go to a psychologist or they won't go to a psychiatrist, they don't trust them, that sort of thing. But what we need to do is realize that that's what their profession is, that's what they're trained for, and they're there to help us. Being a proactive about mental health, seeing a mental health professional is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. I know many people that refuse to go to a counselor because they feel like it's a sign of weakness for them. There's, you know, I'm not that weak. I can handle this. I can man up. I can toughen up. I can do this. But you know what? It's okay to be vulnerable and to ask for help. One of the things that we strongly encourage is to get a mental health evaluation. You know, often you see people may go to their general practitioner, tell them they're depressed, and they say, well, try this medicine. It's much more effective if you share the signs that you're having and they say, well, you know, maybe with the signs that you're having, there are concerns. Perhaps it would be good to get a mental health evaluation. If you can find a diagnosis, you can treat it. If you don't know the diagnosis, it's much more difficult to treat. Then, of course, you discuss your treatment options. You know, do you need medication? I don't think medication alone is always the best option. I think there should be some type of other treatment, whether it be in-person counseling, group counseling, working with a mental health service, all of those treatment options. You want to look, and for some people, it may be just that they need to go to counseling a few times. For another person, it may mean that they need individual counseling or some type of group work on a long, ongoing basis. And for some people, it's lifelong. Some of our other illnesses are lifelong illnesses, and you have to take care of them for the rest of your life. And if you don't, they can get very ill. And then, as I said, you look at what works for each person. Another thing that I like to point out, I lost a son to suicide, and my daughter was in college. He was 16, and she decided to go to a counselor. She went to 3 counselors. Finally, by the 4th one, she found one that really connected with her, and she connected with them. So oftentimes people may go to a counselor one time, and they say that didn't work. I'm not going to counseling, it didn't work. it didn't work because they didn't feel comfortable with that particular therapist. So it's oftentimes good to go back to the drawing board or go back and keep seeking until you find the person that you really connect with. The law requires insurance plans to cover mental health services, the same as physical health services. This is something that I've seen change over the years as well since I've been involved. I went to an advocacy forum in DC with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And at the time, I believe it was Congressman Patrick Kennedy. He was the son of Ted Kennedy. Ted Kennedy actually opened the bill for what they call mental health parity, meaning that insurance companies had to include mental health services, but it was really never implemented once Ted Kennedy wrote the bill. So his son Patrick had a big part in helping that bill get implemented. So now health insurance companies do provide mental health care, most of them. And when you are shopping for health care, it's often good to see what they do offer for mental health. And if it's not suitable for your needs, then you may need to shop around till you find one that is. Self-care strengthens mental health. Self-care strengthens physical health as well. Self-care strengthens chronic health. So just like any other health condition, these 4 things are things that we need to make sure that we're taking care of in our life. Are we exercising regularly? Is the person that's ill getting some type of movement? Are there sleep patterns? Are they sleeping too much? Are they not sleeping enough? So that is something that really needs to be worked on, and improving sleep patterns. Healthy diet, of course. A med student told me once that in med school, they're told that the stomach is the second brain because it uses a lot of the same hormones and all those things that go on inside that are used for the brain. They both use a lot of the same hormones. So really, what we eat really can have an impact on our brain function. And also managing our stress, learning to say no, not taking on too much is a huge stress management skill that I think in our society, a lot of us tend to neglect that one, taking on a bit too much, seeing where we need to slow down and take a breath of fresh air, smell the flowers and all that good stuff, take a walk, make sure you get a nap, and make sure you have a healthy diet. Support for loss survivors and those with lived experience. So what we really try to do, and a lot of our programs now are really focusing and trying to target those people who have either attempted or possibly have had ideas of suicide. We call those people with lived experience. They have experienced the ideation. They have actually experienced an attempt. And we have found the more and more we can keep those people engaged in help-seeking behavior, we can help them as well and keep them on the prevention mode as long as we possibly can for the rest of their life. The most important thing you can put between a suicidal person and their way of ending their life is time. And I'm going to read this to you because I think this is very, very important. For people who are at a crisis point, the most important thing you can put between a suicidal person and the way of ending their life is time, T-I-M-E, time. Because what research shows is that by temporarily reducing a suicidal person access to lethal means, we give suicidal individuals time for the intense suicidal risk and ideation to diminish. and time for someone to intervene with mental health support and resources. You know, so often we give out what is called the Lifeline number. It's 1-800-273-TALK. And some people will say, how can talking to a stranger prevent someone from suicide? Well, research has shown often people are in a real episode of despair and hopelessness. And if we can give them the time to work through that, keep them on the wanting to live side, distracting them from those thoughts, being with them until those thoughts subside, certainly can stop the action. We can save lives in that way. And I have actually called the Lifeline. I had them do a welfare check on someone. They said at the time they were fine. The next day, they attempted. The police were called. They ended up calling me because they had a report that I had reported and asked them to check on them and do a welfare check. So there's a lot of neat ways that the Lifeline can help. The Lifeline is a national number, but there are local volunteers that will help people connect to more local resources. We want to give them time. Of course, limiting access to means prevents suicide. And I'll tell you a few little stories about some of these. One of the things they've learned that carbon monoxide sensors on cars, that when cars are running for some period of time, they will cut off automatically. That could stop someone from attempting in that way. Blister packaging on medication. If a pill can only come out one at a time, and a person has to take so much time to get each pill out, it can give them that time they need to subside. Barriers on bridges. I know most of you know of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, where over 2,500 people have died by suicide on that bridge. And through legislation and foundations like ours, we supported that legislation, and they actually have put nets on the Golden Gate Bridge, and there have been no suicides since they removed the means. Well, someone says maybe they'll go to another bridge. Well, they have found that research shows that if you can remove the means at the time someone is suicidal, research shows that most of the time they do not attempt at that same type of means. There was a bridge in DC. They battled whether or not to put barriers. They called it the suicide bridge. They ended up putting the barriers up, and someone said they're just going to go to another bridge. It didn't happen. It stopped the behavior off that bridge and didn't continue on another. So limiting access to means, locking up firearms is very important. Locking up medications. I know a lot of your community service boards can provide locks for, and maybe the police department, I'm not sure, for firearms and that sort of thing. Y'all can probably tell us a little bit about that afterwards, but certainly it is important to make sure firearms are secure and out of reach of those that may be at risk. So you've learned a lot, and let's say you're concerned about someone or even concerned about yourself. So how do you approach that person? Well, it's time to have a conversation. It's important to have that caring, supportive conversation with someone you might be worried about. But it's also probably one of the most difficult conversations you could have with someone, because it's quite personal when you start talking about a person's feelings and their beliefs and their behaviors. So you want to watch for the warning signs, and we're going to share some of those warning signs with you. You reach out, and then you ask for help. There's 3 areas of warning signs that we look at. We look at what they say, we look at what they do, and we look at those changes in their moods and their dispositions. So if you're really listening to a person and there's a lot of statements that they say that they want to end their lives. I don't want to be here anymore. I can't take this anymore. I just want to go to sleep forever. When you start hearing that kind of language, that means that the ideation may be going on with that person, saying they have no reason to live. Another one is talking about they're a burden to others, or the cost of medical care, being concerned that that could be a cost that the family can't afford. Therefore, they feel like they're a burden. They're a burden to everyone. And that is something that it's probably one of the most common things that you hear from someone, is that they feel that they're a burden to others. Or they just may be feeling very overwhelmed and feeling trapped, like in a hole they can't get out of. Again, we get back to that problem solving and decision making. One doesn't have those problem solving skills and those decision making skills that they can develop. They feel very trapped because they don't know what to do. And again, talking about what pain they're in, or it's so unbearable, I can't bear it anymore, I can't take it anymore. Those are the kind of language you hear in someone who may have suicidal ideation. Then we look at how they act, and we look at for change. You know, the things that they normally are interested in, all of a sudden, no more. If you see increased use of substance abuse, alcohol and drugs, someone's not sleeping at night, they become sleep deprived, they become exhausted all the time, acting recklessly, thinking before doing, getting into situations not really thinking about the consequences and end up with a bad result, isolating from family and friends, not wanting to hang out with their friends. Sometimes, you know, what some kids have noticed, where kids who may have been active on social media all of a sudden disappear. They don't want to participate in their sports activities or go to their lessons or go to a club or anything, any of those changes. Some people can look at computer history and see what they've looked up. Have they looked up for ways to kill themselves on a computer? And another one is giving away possessions. So all these are some changes that you would want to pay attention to. Mood swings, okay? Do they seem depressed all the time? Apathy, that don't care attitude. You know, they don't want to do anything because they just don't care anymore. Or, you know, maybe unexplained rage. All of a sudden, mad for, we can't understand why. Or irritability. We walk eggshells around that person, knowing that whatever we say or do may upset them. Of course, impulsivity is one, acting without thinking. Also, if someone has been through a humiliating experience, I think of teens sometimes who may have been embarrassed on social media, someone who may have been bullied at school and may have, you know, been embarrassed publicly. That can certainly set someone in a bad mood or in a very sad mood. And then, of course, worrying the what ifs of the world. When I was a school counselor, I used to tell kids, let's not start sentences with what if. Let's start sentences with so what if. So what if I get a bad grade on the test? I know there'll be other grades put to my average. Not what if I fail the test? Because if I say it that way, there's no solution at the end of my worry. So you always, if someone worries and has worry statements, you want to think of things that they could do to help them with that worry. So, you know, you question yourself, is this person really having trouble? I'm not sure, I'm not a professional, but you know what? Nothing can we trust better than our gut. And when you feel that something isn't right, or your gut is telling you, I'm really worried about this person, think of it as though you're the only one who's going to reach out. Sometimes we assume that maybe they do have that family support. They do have a community. They do have their church. They'll be fine. Well, but we still feel bad about how they're feeling. Then we really want to think about trust our gut. And if we feel that there is something not right, we are the ones that need to ask them if they're okay and have that conversation with them. How do we reach out? How do we do that? Okay, well, you make an appointment, whether it be sitting at the table drinking coffee, whether it be going for a walk, whether it be going for a road trip or a ride where you can talk just the two of you. You certainly don't want to reach out and have that conversation at the dinner table with the rest of the family there. That wouldn't work. And then I can't stress this enough. Listen to their story. Listen without judgment. Listen some more, and after that, maybe listen some more. A lot of listening, and avoid not really wanting to solve it for them. Just let them know that you care, you're concerned, and praise them for sharing what's bothering them. How much courage it must take for one to share their most vulnerable feelings and let you see their vulnerability. It used to be a myth that people thought if you asked people, are you thinking about taking your life? Are you thinking about ending your life? Have you thought about suicide? We think, oh gosh, maybe we would encourage them or make them even madder or set them off to do such a thing. Actually, by coming out and asking them, it can really validate for them that you realize how bad they feel. They may tell you, no, they're not thinking about it, and they may be, but at least they know that you validate how bad they feel, and that can be comforting. They might not tell you right away, but at least they know that you feel bad, and that can be comforting in itself. And then, of course, you want to seek them to get mental health services. There are 3 things that we try to get people to avoid. You want to avoid minimizing their feelings. You know, those of us that may have never experienced really deep, major depression may not really imagine how that really feels. So we can't really try to judge that or say, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. You're always a happy person. You know, that wasn't that big a deal what happened to you. You're going to be okay. Sometimes if we minimize, we go right over really hearing how bad they feel. Avoid trying to convince them that life is worth living. If a person is nearing a crisis point, they're not thinking clearly. If you try to go over philosophical debates about life being worth living, really can't be that helpful. Well, look, you have a nice home, your family's intact, your career is going good, and all that's going to do is make them feel worse if that doesn't make them feel better. So sometimes if we try to convince them that everything's okay for them, it may make them feel even worse. And again, back to that old advice giving. Our advice to them, I guess, would be that we really support getting them help. But if we try to fix it for them, we're not really facilitating and helping them problem solve. Again, we're trying to do it for them. And that really doesn't help a person to do it for them. If you think if you really are scared, like crisis, like right now you're worried that they're going to do something, of course you would stay with them. Of course you would remove lethal means. And someone needs to escort them to the hospital, to a mental health facility, call 911 sometimes. I actually, doing this kind of work, I had a teenager call me one time and say, my mother's talking about suicide. So I went over there, and her 3 daughters, we talked to her. She refused to go get help. So I called the community service mental health hotline and said, what do I do? They said, well, you can tell them that they need to go with you to the hospital, or you can call the police and have the police escort them to the hospital. So, and when I did that, the person decided to go with me and I took them. The main thing is get them there if they are in crisis. As I talked before, I talked about the Suicide Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK. And I think in the year 2022, we're actually going to have a 3-digit number for mental health. Instead of calling 911, I think it's going to be something like 988. I'm not sure, but I think in year 2022, we're actually going to transfer to a 3-digit number for mental health emergencies. And so we don't have to remember the 1-800-273-TALK. But for now, that is good. Some people don't like to talk, but they like to text. So we do have a crisis text line as well. One thing I learned in one of my suicide prevention classes is that if you tell Siri or Hey Google on the phone that you're feeling suicidal, it will automatically dial that suicide prevention lifeline. And you can practice it and try it later. It's kind of cool to tell Siri you're thinking about suicide, and right away she comes back and says, shall I call for some help for you? Pretty cool. Again, 911 for emergencies. And back to that statement that I shared before, we really need to work on educating our communities about mental health and have them become smart about mental health. That's why we call it Talk Saves Lives. The more we can talk about it comfortably, the more we can make it so realize that awful lot of people, I think it's something like 1 in 4 people suffer from a mental health condition, but another statistic says only 2 out of 5 ask for help. We want 5 out of 5 asking for help. This is something too you could put in the chat to remind yourself or write this down. If you liked this program, you can give us feedback. If you didn't like it, you can give us feedback or anything that you felt that was good or not good. You can go to our organization, afsp.org, and put TSL for Talk Saves Lives participants, and you can provide feedback. If you want to know more information about this program, or if you would like for us to share it, if you go to this website, they'll tell you, get in touch with your local chapter. And I will give you the link for that in the chat as soon as I close this down. Okay, that is the end. I will exit.
All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Ramsey. I really appreciate this information. We do have several comments and questions in the chat, but I would like for you to talk about your walk first, and then I'm going to stop the recording, and then we'll open up the floor for questions, or I'll share the questions from the chat and the conversation. Okay.
Okay.
So if you would, Ms. Ramsey, would you let everyone know about the walk on October the 2nd?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Actually, about 11 years ago, I started the first, what is called the Out of the Darkness Walk in Richmond. We had it at Monroe Park in 2010. Then we had the walk annually in the fall at Deep Run Park. Now, last year we outgrew Deep Run Park because of parking. We started out with about 350 participants, our walk in 2011. And I think we were up to 1,600 participants when we had our walk in 2019. We didn't have our walk in 2020 because of the pandemic. So we've really grown, and this next year, it's going to be at Bird Park. It's going to be on October the 2nd, and I will put the link for how you can get information about it. /VIRGINI. Okay, this is the link. If you go to that link and if you click on events, you will find that walk. You will find lots of things that we are doing. We're doing Talk Saves Lives presentations. We're doing one called More Than Sad. We have a read aloud book for children where a parent and a child can read about mental health together and fill out a health plan, send it in, and they get a little prize paw keychain sent back to them because they participated in writing a health plan. But I will tell you out of experience, going to the walk was probably one of the most significant things for me after losing family members to suicide. I realized I wasn't alone. People can form teams. People can go by themselves. People can join a team. And when I mean a team, lots of teams come with T-shirts. They come dressed up as a team to honor someone they've lost to suicide. Sometimes community health organizations come as a team to promote prevention. It's just a very comforting event to go through if one struggles or if one has lost someone to suicide. And it's to raise money for things like we're doing tonight.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shirley.
Yeah, it's Out of the Darkness Walk, by the way.
Out of the Darkness Walk. That is October the 2nd at Bird Park. And that's pretty amazing. Over 1,600 participants. So hopefully we can break that this year as well.
Yeah, we raised $300, I think, the first year, and last year we raised over 100,000.
Wow, that is a blessing. That's amazing.
We've really grown. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So I'm going to stop the recording first, and then we'll open it up the chat questions and comments. So
Okay.
Allow me to stop it. And again, for our audience that's watching online, thank you so much, Shirley, for this great presentation. Thank you for being with us on tonight.
Okay.